I just want to start by asking some background questions. Um, where were your parents from?
My mother was from Selma, Alabama, and my father from Fairfield, Alabama.
And you were born where?
In Fairfield.
In Fairfield. Fairfield, a suburb of Birmingham, or is Birmingham a suburb of Fairfield?
Larry Lincoln would say it's a suburb of Fairfield.
How many brothers and sisters did you have, and what were your rank order?
Well, there were 8 of us. Now there are 7.
Okay.
And I'm the third from the beginning of the siblings.
All right. So you're the third oldest.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me just a bit about your parents and their education.
Well, my father had an 11th grade education. And my mother had about a 8th or 9th grade education because she went to night school to get that far.
Right.
And she was a domestic worker for many years, and after that she became an Avon salesperson.
I see. What kind of work does your father do?
Steel worker.
Okay, well, in Fairfield, like.
Yeah.
Tell me then, Fairfield is known really around the country for any number of things, particularly steel, and for being the birthplace of Willie Mays.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little, can you just describe the community of Fairfield as you grew up?
Well, Fairfield was quite a stable community during those days, and I'm speaking comparatively now. Most of the persons worked in one of the steel mills or the brickyard or someplace. And Fairfield Industrial High School, in my opinion, was the greatest high school in the world. Academics were stressed first priority, second priority, third priority, as well as discipline. And there are Fairfield graduates holding down very significant professional positions in all the major cities in this country.
There was a gentleman there at Fairfield that sort of set the tone, Dr. Oliver.
Professor E.J. Oliver,
Yes.
in my opinion, the greatest principal that ever lived, a strict disciplinarian who placed all emphasis on discipline and education. And when we used to go down to Montgomery to compete against high schools from all over Alabama, those were during the days of segregation. There were no whites to compete against. Wouldn't have mattered. We would have done just as well or better, I'm sure. But we used to win the majority of the first place ribbons in all the academic subjects: math, science, biology, chemistry, you name it. We won it.
So you looked then at Fairfield as setting a firm foundation for you in the community, the high school.
Very much
was
so.
the foundation.
For example, if you attended Fairfield Industrial High, if you were absent, you had to go back home the next day and bring your mother or your father or your aunt or uncle or somebody that Professor Oliver knew. Or same thing applied if you were tardy. So it was well run, well organized.
What do you remember about recreation in Fairfield?
Well, that was just, aside from the high school football and basketball teams, those were the 2 sports we had in those days, and of course the band. And then there was sandlot baseball. Most of the teams sponsored teams, most of the companies, like USX, at that time it was US Steel, they would sponsor teams. SIPCO would have a team, Stockton would have a team, they would compete against each other.
Uh, what was your community's relationship to the police department?
Horrible. There was no relationship. Horrible. The police had one job, that was to arrest black folk.
So are you suggesting that the police was not in the community to protect and serve?
Well, I'm not suggesting, I'm stating it emphatically. No, they were not.
How long were you in the Army at that point?
Well, in 49, I went in stayed a year, got discharged in September 50, went back in September, got discharged in July rather, 50, went right back in September 50 when the Korean War started. And I got out in October 51, and I went back in the service in 54, and got out and was discharged in 57.
What did you do between 51 and 54?
I worked at the Dodge automobile plant, which was a division of Chrysler,
And where was that?
Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit. How did you compare Detroit with Birmingham?
Oh, it beat Birmingham in 1,000 different ways in terms of discrimination and segregation, all that kind of stuff. It was not a panacea, however, but it was a far cry from what we had to undergo here in the South.
So you then went back into the military from Detroit.
Yeah,
And you were in the military then until
57.
57.
Yeah.
And after you were discharged in 57, what did you do?
I went back to Detroit and went back to work at the Dodge automobile plant, and got laid off in 58, I believe it was. And I came back to Birmingham.
And when you came back to Birmingham, did you then live in Birmingham or in Fairfield?
I lived in Fairfield.
Were you married at the time?
No,
Still a young man, footloose and fancy free.
that's right.
In 1958, Birmingham was really sort of embarking on at least preparing for what would take place in the next few years. In 56, of course, the NAACP is outlawed from organizing in the state of Alabama. And the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights is developed. 1958, when you returned, did you go to work at U.S. Steel?
No, when I came back in 1958, I was hustling in the pool room and shooting craps,
Okay.
that kind of stuff. And I was waiting to go back to Detroit to work at Dodge automobile plant when they sent me a telegram to come back. In the meantime, I started the miles in 59.
Okay.
And when they called me to come back to work at Dodge Main, I decided to stay in college.
You were a student leader at the time.
Yeah, I was student government president.
Okay. How did that evolve? How did you get involved in student government?
Well, you know, when time to run for the offices, a lot of the students asked me to run. So I ran and I won.
So you were perceived as a leader when you.
Yeah, well, you
came
see,
back.
I was much older than the majority of the students. You see, I was about 29 or 30 when I went to college. And most of these kids were like 18, 19, 20.
Yeah. Well, and you happened then to have been at Miles at a very, really volatile time. Because in 1960, of course, you had the beginning of the sit-in movement, although it began much earlier. But college students started getting involved in 61. You have the Freedom Rides that come. And Miles then is organizing. Tell me a little about that period between 60 and prior to the demonstrations in 63.
Well, I believe it was in 59, the fall of 59. Some of the students went down in the park, Kelly Ingram Park, to protest, and they were arrested. And at that time, Dr. Bell was president of Miles College. And his philosophy was 360 degrees away from ours in terms of what we were about.
We meaning the students?
Students, yeah. And so that little protest didn't get off the ground really. The infamous Bull Connor was in office then, as you may well know. And we didn't really get involved again until I would think probably around late '61 when we started organizing.
Right. Were you at all involved, familiar with what was taking place with the development of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights?
No, I became a member before the demonstrations and the selective buying campaign and all that stuff. But in the very beginning, when Reverend Shuttlesworth organized it, I don't think I had come back to Birmingham at that time.
Yeah, they organized in '56.
Yeah, well, I had.
You were away
Yeah, I was
at
away.
that time. In '61, when the organizing of students started to take place, what precipitated that?
Well, some of the students, like in North Carolina, were protesting and demonstrating.
Right.
And a group of us felt that we should do the same thing because we were hamstrung by segregation, discrimination, and all those other ills and wrongs. So we just got a committee together. U.W. Clement, who is now federal judge U.W. Clement, Shelley Millender, you may know Shelley.
I do know Shelley.
A fellow by the name of Rotha Meredith, and Dr. Jonathan McPherson, who at that time was a chemistry professor here, who now is the owner of Scott McPherson Funeral Home. He was our advisor and worked with us in the very beginning.
And this is based upon what you see happening in North Carolina with the 4 students who started the city.
Yeah. We felt that we could not sit idly by and not protest here because the conditions in Alabama were worse than those in North Carolina. And I personally never accepted the role of being subservient to white folk, even as a boy, young boy.
What do you remember? Why do you say that as a young boy you didn't accept it?
Because occasionally I would get in fights with white boys about calling me nigger, and I'd fight at the drop of a hat. And then, you walking on the sidewalk sometime, and you approach a white person, they'd want you to move off and let them by, and I refused to do it, and stuff like that.
What did your parents say about that kind of behavior at the time?
Well, my mother, in particular my grandmother, always told us not to pick a fight, but don't run from a fight. If anybody accosted us, to stand our ground. Be the person black, white, green, or brown.
So when you arrived in at Miles College, with that kind of background and with what it started to develop and students starting to get involved in the struggle, you basically were already primed
Yeah.
for that kind of activity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.